Hey everybody, Israel coming here from In That Word, and in today's video we're going to be talking about, was Adam the first man? And before we get started, if you want to learn more about the Bible on a week-to-week basis, then make sure you hit the subscribe button below this video, and obviously hit the bell notification as well, so you update every single time we release a new video. So this video is kind of like a part 2 to a video I released recently, which was Adam the first man? And I went into loads of detail in that video about different things that identified why Adam was the first man. So I really recommend, before you go through this video, you make sure you watch that video and then come back to this video. So what I wanted to do with this video is a bit different from the first video, which is kind of add more depth to the foundation I laid in the first video and kind of hit certain things from different angles, because generally what's going to happen is when you make a video, when you're going through scriptures, there's going to be people that obviously have questions. Oh, what about this? What about that? So there's a couple of angles I want to hit in today's video which I think are really key, and they're going to be stemming from questions I've seen since I made the first video. So let's jump straight into the scriptures and let's get started. Alright, so when considering was Adam the first man, a big roadblock, a big stumbling block for many people is Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27, where it reads, "And God said, Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his image, in the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. So they read that, they go on to Genesis 2 and they start saying, okay, you know what? This isn't talking about Adam. Okay, we're talking about he created male and female. Okay, that's not talking about Adam. And what I want to do is just give you a couple of scriptures that kind of prove that it's talking about Adam. For those of you who have been watching this video, or maybe you watched part 1 and you're saying, no, you covered so many different points, but this one is the sticking point. How do you get around it? So the first thing I want to go to, just to kind of give you some context and clarity about Genesis 1:26 to 27, talking about Adam and Eve, is in Genesis 5, and I kind of alluded to Genesis 5 a little bit in part 1, so make sure you check it out if you haven't already, where I was basically talking about one thing you see throughout the scriptures is you see sometimes you get a bird's eye view, which is far above, and you're getting loads of details. Okay, maybe you're getting loads of information, but maybe not the nitty-gritty details. But then you might have another piece of text somewhere in the Bible which is going to get really specific into what we're talking about. And I talked about when you see these are the generations, okay, you see that a lot. Okay, generally you might see that, and then you see a really close up to what we're talking about. Well, thinking about what we talked about in Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27, let's look at Genesis 5 verse 1 to 2 and see what it says. It says, "This the book of the generations of Adam." Okay, Adam. "In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him." Okay, look at the next verse. "Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created." So what is that talking about? That's linking Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27, created he them, male and female, to Genesis 2, Adam being the first man. It's talking about the same thing. Now, that's only one piece of text to confirm it. I want to give you more, and this even kind of segues in just quickly, briefly, to a really vital lesson you get when you're really diving deep into studying the Bible for yourself, is don't just take one abstract verse from one place in the Bible and run with it. Okay, you always want to have at least 2 or 3, if not more, different pieces of Bible verses or text which is agreeing with the point you're trying to make. And it's always good if you can get it from Old Testament and New Testament, because you see a constant theme through 2 testaments. So not only have you got 2 verses here, Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27 and Genesis 5 verse 1 to 2, that have given you the answer. Now I want to go to the New Testament to give you even more context. So not only has Genesis 5 verse 1 to 2 kind of linked Genesis 1 verse 26 and 27 to Genesis 2, now I want to get more context from the New Testament, which is kind of even cement even further. So the piece of text I want to read from is Matthew 19 first and foremost, verse 4 and on, and it says, "And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made at the beginning made them male and female?" Okay, similar to what we read in Genesis 5 verse 1 to 2. And look what it says, "And said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So here Jesus is speaking, basically saying, look, have you not read in the beginning, the person who created man in the beginning created them male and female? Okay, and it goes on to say, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. That's again linking that male and female from Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27 to Genesis 2, when Adam sees his wife and says, this now is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. The next thing I want to read from the New Testament to just cross-reference this and give you even more insights is Mark chapter 10 verse 6, and it reads, but from the beginning of the creation of God made them male and female. Okay, so again Jesus here, and he says again verse 7, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. So this is Jesus here in Matthew and in Mark, giving you added context to Genesis 5 verse 1 to 2, all linking back to Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27 and Genesis 2, where God gives you a deep dive into Adam and Eve being the first man and woman created. Now the next big stumbling block, the big tipping point for you and maybe other people watching this video is, what about the order of creation? Okay, in Genesis 1, day 1 to 6, things are created in a specific order, but when you get to Genesis 2, things are created in a different order. Now again, I'm going to point you back to part 1 of this video because I kind of outlined that in some detail in that video, but to go deeper in this video, I want to talk about something that I really didn't touch on in part 1, which is, let's go back to Genesis 1 verse 20 and 21 and read something here, okay, about the order. So it reads, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that good. Now what we're reading there is talking about the waters bringing forth all of these different animals. Okay, it's quite clear. Now when we get to Genesis 2, where people like to say, oh, the order of creation is different, I would suggest to you that the order of creation isn't different. The order of what we read about is completely different. So look what it says in Genesis 2 verse 19 to 20. It says, and out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that the name thereof. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found an helpmeet for him. So what does that say? That says out of the ground, okay, brought forth these animals. So it's not even about the order of things, it's actually about, we're actually reading two different things. In Genesis 1, we talked about the waters bringing forth those animals. In Genesis 2 here, we're reading about the ground bringing forth these animals. So is it a contradiction? Or is it like this because of what I pointed out when I talked about this part in part 1 of this question, was Adam the first man? If you don't know what I'm referring to, go back and watch part 1 and see what I talk about, which answers why water brought forth these animals in chapter 1, but the ground brought forth these animals in chapter 2. It's not because the Bible's contradicting itself, it's not because the order is different, it's a completely different reason that I covered in part 1, so make sure you watch it if you haven't watched it already. Now, a third and final tipping point or stumbling block I'm going to focus on in this video is something that comes up typically when you're in opposition to, was Adam the first man or not? And that is, if Adam and Eve were the first people, why was Cain afraid after he'd killed Abel and he knew he was going out of the presence of the Lord? Well, there's a couple of things that people like to overlook and actually miss out, which kind of answer this question. Okay, the first thing we want to talk about is back in Genesis chapter 5. Now I'm going to advise you read the whole of chapter 5 from Adam all the way down to Noah and his sons, because you're going to see a constant theme throughout the whole text, which is XYZ had a particular son, and then they lived X amount of years after that, and they had sons and daughters. Okay, so all for reference sake for this video, all we need to do is read Genesis 5 verse 4, where it says, and the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. Now that doesn't tell us how many sons and daughters he has. That doesn't even tell us any names of the daughters of Adam that he had. But what that leads you to understand is that Adam and Eve had multiple children. Okay, so it's easy to read Genesis 2 and Genesis 3 and think that the only people in the earth are Adam, Eve, Cain and Abel, but that's not actually the case. Okay, now I don't want to get too granular with this, but Seth might not even have been the third child. Okay, they could have had multiple children before Seth, but after Cain and Abel. Okay, reason being we don't get that specific timeline, but obviously we know they've started bearing children. A big mistake a lot of people make is they read this and they just kind of get carried away thinking, oh, hold on, they're here in the earth, it's just Adam, Eve, Cain and Abel, Cain kills Abel, he gets sent out, and now all of a sudden he's saying, oh, I'm afraid. No, there easily could have been thousands and thousands of people actually populated. Now you might think this is crazy if you haven't ever kind of done these studies, but I definitely recommend you look into it about how quickly a family trees can populate. Okay, if they were having kids, okay, let's say they had 10 or 15 or 20 children, okay, those 20 children could have 20 children, and it's not going to take that many layers to that family tree before you've got multiple thousands, hundreds of thousands, and it could be done really quickly in the space of easily 20, 30, 40, 50 years, okay, if not quicker. Now, worst case scenario, even if it takes 100 years, something like that, these people were living hundreds of years. So he was 130 years old when he had Seth. Now think about, if we don't know what age they had Cain and Abel. Let's say, for example, they're in the garden, we don't even know, 30, 40 years, then they commit sin, eat the fruit, God drives them out, etc. A couple years later they have Cain. So they're about 40 years old, 50 years old, okay? Have Cain, have Abel. That's an 80-year gap. You think they stopped having kids for 80 years just to have Seth, and then they had kids after that? No, okay? What you need to realize is you have to always look at the Bible from the view of Jesus Christ. And the reason it shows Cain and Abel is because that story is really vital and really key to the lineage of Jesus Christ. Why? Because if Cain doesn't kill Abel, Abel is probably the son that goes off to Christ's lineage. That's why Genesis 5 is so important, because what does it say? It says, or the end of Genesis 4 actually, where it says, Adam knew his wife Eve again, and she bore Seth. And what did she say? The Lord has appointed her another son in the place of Abel. Okay, so what does that mean? You might take it for face value, you might not take it for face value, but when you think about it, he was the replacement. That's why in Genesis 5 it goes from Adam to Seth. The reason it mentions Seth is because he is key and vital to the lineage of Jesus Christ. And that's how you go from Adam all the way down to Noah, okay, then Shem, Ham and Japheth, and from Noah to Shem, and so forth all the way down to Abraham, to David, etc., to Christ. So that's what you need to think about. Now some of you might be looking at this and saying, well, that's just a throwaway statement. How do we know? Things didn't just happen straight away, and there was time to populate the world, etc. Okay, what you need to look at now is Genesis 4 verse 3. Okay, now Genesis 4 starts by talking about how Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bare Cain. Okay, and she said she'd gotten a man from the Lord. Cain means gotten. Okay, gotten from the Lord. Then it says verse 2, and she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep. Okay, so he's a shepherd, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. So we know that Cain was born before Abel. We also know that Abel was a shepherd. We know that Cain was like a gardener, a husbandman, etc. Look what it says in verse 3, which is the key verse in this whole situation. It says, and in process of time. Okay, we don't know how much time, but that lets you know that time has gone past from the time they were born. I don't believe it was just Cain at 10 years old killing his brother who's 9 or 8 or whatever. These were probably grown men. Why do I think this? Not only because of what I've talked about already. When he gets driven out, we go on to read it says Cain has a wife. Okay, Cain has a wife, he has a son, etc. and all of these kind of things. So it wasn't like these lot were some children. They had Cain, they had Abel, they probably had other kids. Okay, they obviously were able to get married. Well, at least Cain was able to get married. He's able to have a child, etc. But the key verse is verse 3. It says, and in process of time. That identifies to you that time has actually passed. We don't know how much time has passed. We just know a maximum of 130 years could have passed, because they're going to go on to have Seth at some point. Okay, so these 3 stumbling blocks are normally kind of the rebuttals, the big rebuttals that people have when they're thinking about, was Adam the first man? And the first video to this series kind of, I feel, answered the question, but this video has kind of added multiple layers and kind of debunked some of the common opposition to was Adam the first man. Now the scriptures are clear. I'd urge you to basically read these scriptures in depth for yourself as well. Don't just take what I'm saying, and leave a comment below the video and let me know what you think in light of these verses I've actually kind of covered in the scriptures. So on that note, thanks for tuning in and all the best, and look out for a new video at some point in the future, and don't forget to swim daily in the Word of God. Thanks and take care.